Hi, I'm Courtney Cheetah, and I am the Program Associate with Wild Farm Alliance. Joanne is in transit for our field day that's happening tomorrow, so I'm filling in. Thanks for joining us today for the Whole Farm Sustainable Pest Management course. This is the fifth lesson of 12, and our mission is to promote a healthy, vibrant agriculture that protects and restores wild nature. And we help bring wild nature back to farms. Our 2050 vision is to see 1 million nest boxes and perches on farms, hedgerows of habitat the length of to the moon and back to help support all different kinds of beneficials on the farm, and restoring riparian areas because they are the lifeblood of the landscape. And avian pest control is really a big part of that toolbox for managing crops. On our website, the wildfarmalliance.org, under the events and online course tab, you can find 2 free California continuing education courses about supporting avian pest control. Participants will learn about research that shows the benefits of installing nest boxes and habitat in and around farms to attract beneficial birds that provide valuable pest control services. You can take these at your own pace on demand, and the courses are available through the end of 2025. So that's got plenty of time, but check those out when you have a chance. Today's webinar is In-Field and Edge Beneficial Insect Habitat, and we have Eric Brennan, the research horticulturist at USDA's Agriculture Research Services, and Tara Pisani Garu, Director of Environmental Studies and Program, and the Professor of Practice Earth and Environmental Sciences Department at Boston College with us. And I just wanted to let you know that in 2 weeks, we'll be back on Tuesday, December 3rd, with our 6th lesson, which is Managing Soil-Borne Pathogens Without Chemicals, with Margaret Lloyd and Martine Guerrera. So please consider attending all of the rest of the lessons in the series. They occur about every 2 weeks through March. And if you missed one of the early ones, they've been really great. And the recordings are all up on our website under the online courses, under the news and events tab on our website. We have continuing education credits available for DPR and ASA. And I'm going to pass this off to Eric next, but I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If you're having any issues, let us know and we can try and help. I'll hand it over to you, Eric. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's always nice to be able to give a presentation on something that I'm very passionate about, and that's biological control of insect pests. So I look forward to trying to interact with you as much as possible. So to help with this, what I'm actually going to do, rather than give a brand new presentation, is I'm going to use some clips from a video that I made several years ago, which you can go and watch the whole thing for if you want. It's titled "A Biological Control Buffet" or Buffet in the Salad Bowl of America. And I'm going to focus on three, mainly the hedgerow aspect, and then the insectary plant aspect. So there, I'll just show little clips of parts of this video, but you can go watch it, the whole thing if you ever want to. And also, if you want to know more about my research program here in Salinas, California, you can take a picture of this QR code there, and that'll go right to my website where there's links to all my publications and other resources there that you might find interesting. So let's move right to the video. Let me see, how do I get this to advance here? There we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to show you about 1 minute and 28 seconds at the beginning, and then we'll move to another part in a little bit. So here's the introduction part.
Hedgerow control. This is Hoverfly 742 maintained in 2000, heading 180, requesting landing clearance.
Hoverfly 742 turn left, heading 090, descend to 1000 until established on the ILS runway, Coyote Brush 32 approach, clear to land.
Hoverfly 742, turning left, heading 090, descend to 1000 until established on the ILS runway, Coyote Brush 32 approach, clear to land.
So you've probably figured out by now that I'm not your typical air traffic controller. I don't direct airplanes in and out of airports. But you might think of me as an organic air traffic controller or a biological air traffic controller. What I mean is that as I've managed the airspace above this organic farm since 2001, I've tried to encourage a diversity of beneficial organisms to come here to help us to control our pests. And the three main components of our farm that help with this are hedgerows on the farm edges, cover crops that we usually grow when our fields don't have cash crops, and insectary plants that we interplant with our vegetables and strawberries. I like to think of these three components as providing a buffet of food options for beneficial organisms on our farm.
Okay, so you can tell I'm a little bit of a nut, but hopefully that caught your attention and you can go check out more of that video later if you want. All right, so that's a little bit of the introduction. Let me move forward to the focus on the hedgerow part, which I think should be right here.
Okay, so let me now provide a few details about these three critical biological control components, starting with my favorite place on the farm, the hedgerow. In some ways, it reminds me of the biologically diverse tropical forests in Papua New Guinea, where I grew up, and which surrounded many of the agricultural fields there. Our hedgerow is a fun place to explore that's filled with biodiversity and is just a relaxing place to take a break when you need one. I consider it a sacred place because it reminds us of the balanced natural ecosystem that once dominated this landscape and that has so much to teach us to help us to improve our agricultural systems. The hedgerow is essentially the supporting backbone of our biological control system. What I mean by supporting backbone is that the hedgerow is the most stable, complex, and permanent part of our farm. And it's a refuge for beneficial organisms when we disturb our fields with intense tillage between crops. The hedgerows are then the major source of beneficial insects to recolonize our new plantings. I remember the fun and productive day that our hedgerow was planted in 2003 with the help of volunteers and our local hedgerow guru, my friend Sam. Since then, our hedgerow has been low maintenance because it includes a diversity of drought-tolerant native perennials, which were irrigated only during the first year. Now, a key benefit of the hedgerow and the adjacent berm with flowering annuals is that the diversity of plants ensures that there's always something flowering to provide beneficial insects like hoverflies with the pollen and the nectar that they need to reproduce and thrive. For example, the coyote brush plant, where hoverfly 742 landed, it flowers in the fall and the winter when there are few other sources of food for adult hoverflies on our farm. Now, there are some challenges with hedgerows. For example, some people think that hedgerows increase the risk of food safety problems from rodents and try to minimize this with fences and toxic baits along the borders with neighboring hedgerows. But I've not seen any compelling scientific evidence to support this concern about food safety. In fact, recent research suggests that removing non-crop vegetation like hedgerows may actually increase food safety pathogens. Now, one clear challenge with hedgerows is from leaf-eating birds, like the white-crowned sparrows. They like to overwinter in the hedgerows and eat leaves of some crops right next to the hedgerow. Ironically, these same birds may actually help us, though, because they can also eat weed foliage under the canopy of some of our cover crops.
All right, so that's the hedgerow part, and now we're going to move forward to the sweet alyssum part, which is at about 7 minutes and 40 seconds right here.
All right, now for the last part of our biological control buffet, the insectary plants. There are many different types of insectary plants in our region, but I'll just briefly describe two ways that my research has improved the efficiency of using one popular insectary plant, sweet alyssum. First, I'll describe it for transplanted lettuce and then also for direct seeded lettuce. Alyssum flowers are a great source of pollen and nectar for adult hoverflies and encourages them to move through lettuce fields. In the process, the female hoverflies lay eggs on lettuce that has aphids. And the larvae that hatch from these eggs eat the aphids live. When I started working with transplanted lettuce in 2004, farmers here usually gave up about 5 to 10% of their field to grow alyssum in strips or as randomly scattered plants through the field. But I found that a far more land-efficient approach to get plenty of alyssum flowers into the field was simply to insert alyssum transplants between the regularly spaced lettuce without displacing any lettuce. In other words, you don't need to give up space for alyssum. We call this additive intercropping.
All right, so that is that's all the parts of the video clip that I want, or the video that I wanted to show you. You can go check out other parts like this direct seeding of alyssum if you want, but I think we have a little bit of time for some questions, right, Courtney?
Yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and maybe we could launch the poll questions right now. And if you're going to request the continuing education credit, make sure that you answer these. And we'll just give a minute for participants to respond to these. Okay, we're at about 76%. Do you want to, we can close the poll and go over those.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. You got the three things, the insectary plants, the hedgerows, and the cover crops. Those are the three important components of a biological control system that I talked about. They all kind of complement each other and are different, but they, I think, are all an important part of that process, or that strategy. And then I like to think of this, the hedgerow as the backbone of the biocontrol system, because it's permanent, you know. So the other things, actually riparian corridors could also be important if you have them near where you're at. But you know, a hedgerow is something that I found is very critical in ours. So nice job on answering those questions correctly, everybody. Are there any questions in the chat, Courtney? I'm not.
Yeah, there's a question about how do you decide which plants to put in the hedgerow?
Great question. Well, you want them to do good things and not do bad things in a nutshell. And so trying to figure out plants that are, you know, flower in a consistent way or flower at different times of the year is really helpful. So we have a lot of diversity in our hedgerow. Also, plants that are easy to maintain and get established in your area would be important. And what's become more and more apparent to me over time is also selecting hedgerow plants that don't create problems in the farming system. And what I'm specifically thinking about here are challenges with certain vertebrates like rabbits. You know, we don't have a lot of rabbit predators at our farm, and so trying to minimize kind of rabbit habitat has been critical. And so for us, plants that don't have a huge amount of very dense low vegetation or low canopy, which rabbits love to hang out in, that's become more important. And so if I was going to plant a new hedgerow, which we will be doing pretty soon, we try to minimize plants that have that very dense lower canopy, because that has been a bit of an issue for us with rabbits. But knowing your cover crop or knowing your hedgerow plants is critical. Sometimes you don't know until you plant them, right? It's not a and it could differ from one setting to another. So I encourage people to try a lot of different things, see what you like, and you know, what works for you, as well as use resources. There's good resources out there, other farmers, other growers that have used hedgerows, as well as some publications. So
great. Are there any specific resources that you really like for discovering specific species?
Sam Earnshaw made a hedgerow, like a manual a few years back, which I refer to quite often. Maybe you can put the link to that in the chat. That's probably the main one that I go to, because I've learned a lot from that in terms of just availability of plants and some of the different characteristics.
Great. Why don't we move on to Tara's part and then we will
Yeah.
come back for more questions and answers at the end.
So I should hit stop sharing, right?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
sure.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Hello, my name is Tara Pisani-Garreau. It's really nice to be with you. And Eric, I remember being out there planting that hedgerow on that day. So it's been a long time because your hedgerow is all grown up now, just like you. um, so I'm at Boston College. I'm a few hours ahead of you folks. I'm a professor of the practice in Earth Environmental Sciences, and I also direct environmental studies. And I'm going to talk about enhancing natural biocontrol services on the farm. And my secondary title is this: recruiting good bugs to work for you and the farm. Just like any employee, we've got to pay our insects, and we got to pay them in food and shelter. So I'll talk a little bit about nature-based biocontrol, the big picture, conservation biocontrol in particular, and then also a gallery of natural enemies that provide a lot of pest services in California systems, and some of my work in California hedgerows. So nature-based biocontrol, there are kind of three different ways that you can provide a natural biological control in the farm. And the first one is called classical biocontrol. And this is when an exotic natural enemy is released in the landscape to control an exotic pest. So typically these are found in the host country where that pest and the natural enemy co-evolve together. And it can be really helpful for bringing down pests. A second one is called augmentative biocontrol, and this is when we release resident natural enemies to boost resident populations, happens at a farm level. And then the third one is conservation biocontrol, where we create habitat, the conditions to allow natural enemies to exist in the farm landscape. So the very first one, classical biocontrol, this is the Vidalia beetle, that it's in a lady beetle. And it's eating cottony cushion scale, which was a huge pest in citrus. And with that release of Vidalia beetle, some of this pest issues has been minimized for citrus production. Another one that you're probably familiar with is the red spider mite or Persimilis that is released into fields that have two spotted spider mites. So you actually purchase them as almost like another type of insecticide, but they're a biological agent and they eat those mites that are on the crop. However, if in both of these situations, when the natural enemy runs out of a food supply, it may leave the farm or eventually die out. So conservation biocontrol basically allows them to stay within that farm or within the landscape and come back into the farm when the resources are there for them. And it fits really nicely in with integrated pest management, an ecosystem approach or ecological approach to crop production and protection, using a variety of strategies to help minimize the use of pesticides. And one of the goals of IPM is that I like to remember is we're not trying to just eliminate all the pests because they're actually food source for natural enemies. So we want to keep them below an acceptable level or below the action threshold. And some of the benefits of doing that: safer for people on the farm, safer for the environment, and in the long term, less costly because pest control moves away from being an input that you have to purchase every year to becoming more of a function of the farm itself. Conserving beneficial insects is also really important in these days. We're experiencing a global decline in insects. And so this type of habitat provides services for a variety of insects. So let's talk about conservation biocontrol. There are kind of two main factors that are important here. The first one is to create habitat for natural enemies. And the second one is just to reduce the type of events that kill them in the field or disturb their habitat. So what do natural enemies need? The first is, just like you and I, they need food, and they need a whole variety of it. A lot of our insects eat pollen and nectar. Pollen provides protein and lipids for them. The nectar is basically their fuel source, keeps them moving in the landscape. They'll also use honeydew, which is the sugar that's produced by aphids. And then they need prey. They will eat crop pests, but crop pests aren't always around in the field. So they also need other things to eat when that crop pest isn't around. And they need water, which they can also get from dew that condenses on the leaves of these type of plants. Shelter is really important. I remember from my time in California, especially in Hollister and San Juan Bautista, it can get pretty darn hot in the middle of the fields there. And so a hedgerow, because it has some shade to it, provides a resting spot. There were times when I was out looking at insects and some of them are just hanging out on leaves, taking a midday nap, just like Eric was. And then reducing mortality and disturbance, reduction of pesticides, conservation tillage will be helpful, having a soil cover. And then just like Eric said, having that permanent place, one place on the farm where you're not tilling it or where the plants are there year round. I love this poster from the Xerces Society. It shows you the range of conservation biocontrol practices from riparian habitat and hedgerows to cover crops. Also, some of the plants that we might use for the market, like sunflowers, are an awesome plant for beneficials. Bees love them, wasps love them, bat and bird nest boxes, also maybe some perennial crops that you might be using, and providing some way of having something on the field at all times. So this is like that whole farm picture. You don't really see bare ground here because there's always some place for insects to hang out. So research has shown that diet and having a variety of diet makes a difference. This is the green lacewing, and this was a study that gave the green lacewing females different food sources. They gave them buckwheat flowers to forage on. They gave them some aphids, and they were eating the aphids and some of the honeydew, but then they mixed them both together. And these bigger bars, you can see that the females laid more eggs by having a nutritionally more rich diet. So these right here. One of my first steps in getting into this work was just learning who my natural enemies are and being aware of them in the environment. And then you can start to protect them. So lady beetles or ladybugs, this is what they look like as an adult, but also you want to recognize what they look like as an immature stage. To me, they look like little alligators. And we have praying mantids. On the bottom, these are the lacewings. Now, I always think that this immature, this larva, looks really different from its adult stage, but it's also predaceous on caterpillars, just like this. And in fact, for green lacewings, they're more predaceous in the larval form than in the adult form. Oh, let me come back here. Sorry. The ones in the middle, ground beetles, these have big mandibles and they eat larvae that will be overwintering in the soil, like the one on the left, that's called Scorites. Would not want to come across that if I was a caterpillar. The one in the middle is actually a weed seed predator. So they love all the seeds that get shed by weeds in the fall time. And then the tiger beetle is known as the fastest living animal, but relative to its size. We also have lots of spiders and daddy longlegs or pillions. These would be hanging out on the vegetation. They're also predators in the field. And then one of the groups I wanted to bring in, which when I was out in California doing this research, I wasn't taking a look at dragonflies, and they're not typically considered part of an agroecosystem biocontrol, except in like rice paddies in Asia, but actually they're can play a role in the field, and they're voracious predators. They catch their prey in midair. They have very high accuracy rate, and they spend most of their life in a pond or a stream. So if you have any wetland vegetation, keep your eyes out for dragonflies and damselflies. They're awesome generalist predators. And these are insect predators that have piercing, sucking mouth parts. And their immature stage looks a little different from their adult stage, not entirely, but so the minute pirate bugs, these are small predators, and you can see the adults are easy to recognize because they have that distinctive black and white coloration, but their nymphal stage looks really different, almost like a little alien there. You can start to see the formation of their wings though, and if they have that snout-like beak, it's a good indicator that you've got a little aureus or minute pirate bug there. Big-eyed bugs are one of my favorite. They're just so cute with their huge eyes that are articulated away from their body. In the nymphal stage, they look more similar. And so getting used to those guys are stouter ones. And also related to these are the damsel bugs or nabidae, and that's the immature stage. On the bottom, we have assassin bugs, look like some of the scariest hemipterans out there. And here it is in an immature stage, eating the grub of a Colorado potato beetle. And then syrphid flies, which we've seen and have such a really different immature stage. It's a maggot, and it's a maggot that eats bugs. So it looks really different than its adult stage. And when in the adult stage, it's just eating the pollen and nectar from flowers. So it is not a predator in the adult stage, but it needs those food resources to make the larvae. Insect parasitoids, some of my favorite insects out there. These are kind of gnarly. They lay their eggs in or on their prey. The egg hatches into a larva and will start to consume the inside of the caterpillar or whatever it's parasitizing. And it will form a larva eventually and then emerge as an adult wasp. These groups on my right are probably the largest and most important parasitic wasps in agriculture. The first are ichneumoniid wasps, and they are characterized by their long abdomen and skinny waist. And I'm going to point out one little feature that's kind of fun. I don't know if you can see my arrow here, but the way you can tell them apart from other wasps that look similar is they have this characteristic horse head in their wing venation. I always love finding that in the wings. On my right are braconid wasps, and they attack aphids and caterpillars as well. And then on my bottom are chalcid wasps. These are really tiny. They're about, most of them are less than 3 millimeters. So like just a little, almost looks like a gnat out there. But if you look closely, they have some really cool iridescence on their bodies and on their wings. So I can often tell them apart just by a little glint or reflection from the sun. And their faces look more like bees. These are related to bees. And their antennae are bent downward, kind of like ants. And the other part that's important is just to recognize them in their cocoon stage. So this is an ichneumoniid wasp on the top that laid its cocoon, and on the very top part here is the remains of the caterpillar that it ingested. So that caterpillar is no longer existing. This is the aphid that got parasitized, and this hole here is from where the wasp climbed out. And then in this case, this is a braconid wasp that lays multiple eggs, the female will, inside a hornworm, a vegetable pest. And so all of these little yellow things are the larvae that are coming out. And then you may have seen something like this where you have the cocoon on the outside. Our chalcid wasps, because they're so tiny, you can think of them as really great egg parasitoids. In terms of California hedgerows, there are lots of different species. And as was mentioned, having them be flowering throughout the growing season is a good rule of thumb. These were some of the ones that I looked at, with the exception of elderberry at the end. But hedgerows provide a lot of different services on the farm. They have that shelter. They also provide erosion control, carbon sequestration. I would think that's going to be something really important for California farmers. Wildlife habit in general, adding beauty to the farm, and also harvestable products like pomegranates that you could put into it. So here's just a little of my data. I collected insects. I really wanted to know generally where insects were and who was hanging out on which plants. So the first graph is just a picture of mean abundance. So I collected lots of insects, categorized them by their ecological function. And I found in just a 1-minute vacuum sample, which is a leaf blower here that I'm using the vacuum side of it, I had more parasitoids than I had herbivores and predators. So this was a really important finding in my research. And then over here were the different plants that I looked at. And so you can see this big bar right here is the coyote brush, or Baccharis pilularis, and the green is for wasp parasitoids. It was like a repository of these wasps, especially those little egg parasitoids. Yarrow was also really attractive to these different groups. But you can see some other ones for generalist predators, Rhamnus californica, coffee berries. This is one of my favorite ones. Blooms middle of the summer, and I got to see those green lacewings adults with their heads inside the flowers, just drinking nectar like drinking out of a bowl. It's just a wonderful thing when you get to see it up close like that. Also, toyon or Christmas berry was really great for our general or for our wasp parasitoids. And buckwheat, Ceanothus Ray Hartman, Ceanothus griseus, all of these did really quite well. And then I also looked at insect movement because it's important that insects move into the crop field. And in the fields that I was looking at really just had the hedgerows on the field margin. So I did a marking experiment. I used fluorescent paint here, and I put sticky traps out in the field. This would be at 100 meters from this hedgerow. And then I looked at the insects on the trap for their fluorescent mark. And these darker bars represent 25 meters into the crop field, and the lighter bars indicate 100 meters. So you can see that the majority of marked insects are coming right from the closer range to the hedgerow. In the same way, these are herbivore pests. I also wanted to look at them and to see if they're using the hedgerow and moving over, and they do as well, although to a lesser extent. And so I have here, this is cucumber beetle, the spotted and the striped, and then we have flea beetles and we have ligus as well. And then parasitism with distance from floral patch. This is a different study, but it's also showing something really similar, that the higher parasitism rates are closer to the floral patch. And so there's basically a spillover effect, or you could think of it as a magnet. A lot of the insects are attracted to those flowers, and then they move out from there. And in this study, it shows that their parasitism was higher, closer to the floral patch. And in the same way, this is a different study that did a marking experiment, and they looked at distance from the flower's edge here. And this one is on the right is the maximum parasitism rates, again, closer to the flowering edge than inside the field. So we have this challenge when we have edge flowering habitat, in that a lot of the insect activity, the parasitism, is going to be closer to the habitat. So the way that we can encourage movement is by using floral strips that Eric had already mentioned, or we could also do that sort of spotting out different flowers inside the field to get more coverage throughout. And with that, I'm going to end. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Let's launch the next set of poll questions, and we can have
Great.
the participants check those out. All right, 80%. Let's yeah. Do you want to talk about the results? Is the first answer hedgerows, I'm assuming?
Yes, sorry. The first one is hedgerows for overwintering. Unless you had a cover crop that was the only thing in your landscape and it was available in the winter, then there probably would be some overwintering happening there, as well as crop residue. But if you have a hedgerow, they are going to use that for overwintering because it's the permanent part of the landscape. And then there's a really classic biocontrol study that was done by Doubt and Nakata in 1965, I want to say. And they found that the edge habitat that had blackberries was really important for providing alternative prey in that winter season. And it allowed those natural enemies, a wasp in particular, to have something to eat before it migrated into the vineyard field to control grape leafhopper. So that winter season can be really important just to keep them in the landscape. And you can do that with hedgerows. And in the second one, yes, to encourage movement, adding in blooming plant species into the crop field will help to get them to move out, encourage them. More diversity, just like that graph that showed a variety, like having just even 2 different types of energy sources increases their diet and their egg laying. Insects are looking for that. They're trying to maximize their nutrition. So providing a variety of things, they'll go explore. And when the quality starts to decline in one plant, they'll go to another one.
Excellent. Then we can move into the question and answer
Sure.
section. And there was a question about, and I think this is for Eric, but if either one of you want to tackle it, if there's any kind of database for beneficials. The pictures were awesome that you shared, Tara, but yeah.
You know, one of the places that I like the book is called The Natural Enemies Handbook. It's by Mary Louise Flint and Steve Dreistedt. That's a great book to have in your collection. It has a lot of super pictures and it can help you with just some picture identification. And then the other thing that I use a lot is iNaturalist or Seek. So I take pictures of things and to get confirmation on what it is. You can do plants, insects, mushrooms. So I've been using that quite a bit when I'm on hikes and looking for things.
Excellent. And Brenda has a question and she might need to come off mute to ask it. She's saying by more parasitoids, is that more species or more individuals compared to predators and herbivores?
Great. So parasitoids, I'm thinking of different species of them. And they have the 3 largest families that provide a lot of the different species that will be in agricultural fields are the Ichneumonidae, Braconidae, and Chalcidoidea. That's more of a super family. It has a lot of different types of families within it. So the more types of parasitoids you have, the more chances that they're going to be attacking insects at different stages of their life cycle. So I think just about every insect probably has a chalcidoid wasp that attacks it in the egg stage. They're probably out there, whether or not it's always happening. But I've read one at some point that insects get attacked at all different stages, in the pupal stage, in their larval stage, and in their adult stage. The Ichneumon wasps are cool because that long abdomen, they're like almost acrobatic. They can flip it over their head and sting something going this way. I can't really do it with my own head like that. They can do it the other way. And so they're aggressive. That's why some caterpillars have defense mechanisms. They spit and try to wiggle out. They have like or the reflex of moving really fast and spitting out to try to warn off predators and parasitoids. But an Ichneumon wasp just stings it with its ovipositor. It's pretty much done. It lays its egg in it, and then the female wasp will fly away and continue to lay eggs in other pests. So it doesn't die like a bee sting. If a bee sometimes stings, it might lose its ovipositor in that process. But in the wasp case, nope, they'll just keep stinging, and some of them will sting. Like in that case of the braconid wasp that's called Cotesia, it lays lots of eggs in one. So one caterpillar can give rise to like 50 offspring. So they can increase in population quickly, but it always happens after the pest population. So there's a lag with parasitoids in terms of their population growth. It's going to follow that of their prey.
Great. I have a question for Eric. So you talked about alyssum a lot. But you also talked about like dill and cilantro, and I think there's one other one. And I'm wondering like what makes alyssum superior, and can you also do that same planting scheme with like the other couple ones that you talked about, the dill and cilantro?
Yeah, the other ones can be good as well. What's great about alyssum is that it flowers basically nonstop. Once it gets going, it doesn't stop. Whereas say buckwheat will flower and then it kind of will die out. or the seed that's been pollinated, or the developing seed will then start maturing, and then you don't get flowers anymore. And that can actually, with a lot of these, or any of these insectary plants, the seed could become a weed. So we don't want that to be an issue. In most cases, sweet alyssum, buckwheat, and the dill and things like that, those don't usually become big problems in fields because they don't have hard seed. The seed will generally germinate quickly, and so it's easy to take out with cultivation. But sweet alyssum is pretty amazing, especially if you use it from a transplant. You transplant it into the field, it'll be a plant like this big, 30 days old, and it's flowering from day one, and it just goes nonstop. And it often hardly even has any leaves, and it'll still be flowering. So it's a pretty incredible one. Also, the flowers are very accessible to a lot of different beneficial insects. So they are with those other ones like buckwheat and some of the umbels as well. But I like alyssum because it's not overly competitive with crops. The crops that we're growing, especially if you planted in between the space and you don't give it its own space. And we've found that you don't have to give it any of its own room. Just stick it right in between your lettuce at a normal space and it'll be fine. Now, if it was in broccoli, I would give it some of its own space, and that's just because broccoli is so competitive as a crop. Broccoli will close canopy and the alyssum will die out if it doesn't have enough light. So with broccoli, I would give it some of its own room, but in lettuce, you don't need to do that.
And it smells really good too. It's lovely.
It does, yeah, really. I mean, that's why they call it sweet alyssum, right?
Mhm.
It's not sour alyssum, but sweet
Nope.
alyssum.
It's like your field has honey in it. And then
That's
if
right.
we can smell it, the insects definitely can smell it.
Yeah, the first video that I ever made was actually on using sweet alyssum to improve biological control in lettuce. And I actually, I'm trying to think if it was in that, I didn't in that video mention this, but I consider all these insectary plants as like restaurants.
Mhm.
So, they're restaurants where the hoverflies stop by, they get filled up, and then they take off and go do their thing. You want that restaurant open basically from sunrise to sunset. Most of these insects aren't moving at night as far as I'm aware, but you want them open early in the morning, and they want them to stay in business all day long. So they, hoverflies or whatever comes in and gets what it needs and then takes off.
Great. Jessica's got a question about that they removed blackberry bushes due to TCAH spreading red blotch virus. Any recommendations for resources to help choose hedgerows and cover crops based on pest presence?
Yeah, so I can share one story. So like for example, coyote brush has this really important insectary habitat for parasitic wasps. At least that's what I found in my data. And that was across 4 different hedgerows from San Juan Bautista, Hollister, and Watsonville. But in one particular site, we had a lot of cucumber beetles that also made use of that coyote brush. And this was in one of the hotter sites where there were melon crops. And so what happened was when there was harvest in the fall, there was this sort of flush of the cucumber beetles that made its way to the field margin and made use of coyote brush. So that was in that case, when I talked to that farmer, I said, I made him aware, you have this pest. It's a pest that's a concern for the farmer, and it does make use of your hedgerow. So you might need to control for that, or put your melon crops far away from where the hedgerow is. Or the other thing too is if a pest uses your parts of your perennial vegetation, you might be able to vacuum them up or trap them or do something when their population goes up really high to try to control them there. So that's one of maybe the benefits of it being concentrated there. I didn't find that all over, but I did find that at that one site. So you can get variation. And I think it just goes to show you have to be aware of like, what are your main pests, which ones might be using plants. Like if lygus is your big issue, you know, we found lygus on buckwheat, perennial buckwheat, as well as on yarrow. So like maybe those would be ones that you'd have to be watching out for, or maybe not plant as much abundance. So just, I think thinking about what you have, what pest complex is most important to you, and making sure you're choosing things that it's not going to be using as much.
Yeah, and Jessica did add the 3-corner alfalfa hopper as the pest. It sounds like she's
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And then Stephen asked a question, do you know of a good trap crop for cucumber and flea beetle?
Well, I will say that if you wanted to like, if you have cucumber beetles as a problem, and if you plant coyote brush during the flowering period, that they'll probably make use of it. And so that would be a trap crop for it at that time when it's blooming. I should also say that for coyote brush, I found parasitic wasps on it when it wasn't blooming. That was really shocking to me. I found them early on in the season. I assumed that they would only be there if there were flowers, but there's probably a complex of insects on coyote brush that the parasitic wasps make use of, or there may be something aromatic in the leaves that it exudes that it makes use of as well. I'm not really sure, but that was an interesting thing in my data.
Great.
I'll just make a mention that we're just about to start a new experiment here in Salinas that will run for 4 years, looking at different hedgerow plants and some of their different characteristics, because although there is some data like what Tara presented there's still a lot of unknowns. And so we're going to be looking, this is a study with Daniel Hasagawa, who's another USDA scientist here. And we're going to be looking at a bunch of different hedgerow plants. So stay tuned for that. It's a 4-year study, which will be, I think, give us some really important agronomic as well as plant insect interaction data. So that'll be cool to see how that goes.
Excellent. And then do you find any advantages or disadvantages with planting male or female Baracus?
I didn't, because at least for parasitic wasps, it wasn't, flowering wasn't the main driver of their population or their abundance on the plants. So I found them on both plants. But I think for those that were, when it was time, for those that did actually use it as a flower, it would probably be more on the female ones for the nectar. But some were also going for the pollen too. So yeah.
Great. Dusty has a question about putting the link in the chat. I'm not sure which link. Is that to the study that Eric was just talking about, maybe? Is there a link to that yet?
No, it's just a big, I don't have a link to that proposal. We haven't started the research yet, but yeah, sorry about that. I don't have any links to show you what we're planning to do in there.
No worries. We'll stay tuned.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think I can put something in that has the distribution of the plants for people, like the insects on the different plants. So I'm going to put a link in here. This was like a research brief from 2013 that I wrote. And on pages, let me see, 3 and actually 4, you can see they're like radar plots that show you their relative abundance across the different plants. And some of them, actually the pest species, I had like particular ones that they went to. So you can take a look at that if you like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric and Tara, for sharing your knowledge. Thanks for everyone for attending. We'd love to get your feedback. And if you need those CE credits, we need your license numbers, and the DPR credit requires that you take a little 10-question quiz. So the link for that is in the chat. It's also up there on the screen right now. There are additional resources on our website. You can watch the full video of Eric's that he showed at the beginning. There's a whole link to his YouTube channel where you can find even more amazing videos. And we hope to see you at our next webinar on December 3rd. Thanks so much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.